Have you ever heard the term Beatles theology? I first heard this in seminary, and it was a reference to their famous song called All You Need Is Love, and it was an indictment upon contemporary Christian preaching in churches that just say, no, you don't need to worry about God's law or God's wrath or God's demands. All you need is love, love, love. That's what we call Beatles theology. But if you look into some of the Beatles songs, there actually is some theological content that's worth looking at. Harrison's song called My Sweet Lord. And fascinatingly enough, when he wrote that song, there's a quote from him. And he talks about what influenced him in particular to write that song. Now, if you know the song, he eventually talks about like Hare Krishna and Hindu elements of religion. But in an interview in the 70s, this is what he said, and I quote, "I was doing a lot of reading at the time." I love this next line. Okay. "I was doing a lot of reading at the time. The Bible and stuff. And I was thinking about Moses going up the mountain and asking God to show himself." He's referring to Exodus chapter 33. Typically, we think of Exodus 3, the episode of the burning bush, but what actually George Harrison is referring to is an incident in chapter 33 that's not particularly well known, where Moses actually comes to God and in essence says, "You've been revealing yourself to me through moderated means, through things. I want to see you. I want to see you for who you are. I want to know you." In the text, he says, "I want to see your glory." And this is the chapter that Harrison is referring to. This little chapter 33, which is, as I said, probably quite obscure to most of us. I was thinking about Moses going up the mountain and asking God to show himself. God says to Moses, "You can't see my face, but I'll show you my back." And that was the basis of the song. "I really want to see you, Lord, but it takes so long, my Lord." I wanted to show everyone that the same God is in all of us, whether you call him Krishna, Christ, or whatever. The song was meant to be a universal prayer. That's a little bit more interesting take on Beatles theology, rather than just mainline liberal Christianity religion of all you need is love, 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 love. That's an interesting take. And I think it summarizes exactly the human dilemma. I think you could find connection of George Harrison with what C.S. Lewis called a universal longing that everyone has, or Pascal, a God-shaped hole in everyone's heart. And we feel this longing. Tolkien writes about this in his short essay entitled On Fairy Stories. But Lewis in particular is the one that's influenced me the most. And he talks about this yearning, this desire, this longing that we have for maybe a greater reality, peace, a transcendental sort of salvation. He says, and we get glimpses of it. Lewis talked about that he had an experience, and he calls these experiences when we get glimpses of it. He says the longing has been there, it was there my whole life, but every once in a while you get a brief little, I don't know, taste of it or touch of it on the mind. Lewis said he had it when he was a young boy with his brother and they were in the woods, and I think they were playing with like a toy boat and something in the stream, and put the toy boat in the stream. But for him, it was just a moment where everything was right. Everything was as it should be. And they felt connected to something bigger, something broader, something greater, something more universal. George Harrison actually summarizes that yearning, that longing, that desire pretty effectively. I want to see you. I want to experience. I want to know the truth. I want to know you. Moses, Exodus 33, I want to see your face. The longing is real. The solutions we usually come up with on how to answer the question of the longing or to find the thing that we're searching for tends to be the problem. Specifically, if we look at the text, if we look at the encounter of Moses in chapter 33, not chapter 3, but chapter 33 with God, and he says to him, if you go to verse 18 of chapter 33, Moses says to God, "Please show me your glory." He's even nice. He says, pretty please, with sugar on top. And God said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you my name, the Lord." That's God's covenantal name. "And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy." This is called sovereignty. This is called predestination. This is called election. God says, I'm going to show you My goodness is going to pass before you. But remember, I retain choice. I retain election sovereignty. And I will choose who I choose. I will have mercy upon whom I have mercy. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious to. But God says to him, you cannot see my face. You can't see my glory. You're unable to see my front side. You're unable to see, in essence, my heart. For no man shall see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand in a rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of this rock, which is, by the way, the basis for one of the greatest Christian hymns that has ever been written, entitled Rock of Ages. The song begins, Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. God says, I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand. And here's the key part. When I pass by, when my front side is coming, God says, I'm going to cover you. I'm going to put my hands over your eyes. I'm going to do this so you can't see me. This is for your protection, but it's also for another reason. And Augustine, Luther, Calvin, there's a number of theologians that have caught this in the text. Not many Christian theologians and scholars have seen this historically, but particularly those three did, Luther, Augustine, and Calvin. This part, in verse 23, God says, then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. So in Exodus 33, Moses is our little Beatle. He's our George Harrison right here saying, I want to see you. And God says, no, but I am going to let you see me in the way that I want to be revealed. He does it for his protection. He says no one can see me and live. But he also does it for another reason. And this is the point Augustine, Luther, and Calvin, particularly Luther, really latched onto. And they say this. Many of us, like Moses, like the Beatles, C.S. Lewis says, this is Pascal, indicate that this is a universal desire in all of us. This is why Harrison even uses that word in his interview. He says, this song was kind of a universal prayer. I really want to see you, but it takes so long. In other words, I have to work. I have to read. I have to meditate. I have to pray. I have to day by day and month by month, I have to work at this. It takes so long. What's conveyed in this text is not only does God cover his eyes and show Moses his backside. Some scholars call this the time that God mooned Moses. But there's a deeper reason here, is that God is saying, not only am I protecting you, but I'm going to show you where I want you to see me. And I want you to notice and to take hold of me, not on my front side in the glory, the majesty, the explanation, the quick answer to the longing, or I want to have all the answers. I want to have the full experience. Most people on this quest with the God-shaped hole, as Pascal refers to it, the longing, as C.S. Lewis refers to it, or the universal prayer, as George Harrison refers to it as, I really want to see you. Most of us, when we look for the solution for how we could get there, Harrison says it takes so long. Almost everyone, Christian, non-Christian alike, Hindu, Buddhist, they tell you that you have to look within. This is why it takes so long. You have to look within. You have to pray. You have to read. You have to meditate. You have to get to a quiet place. You have to listen. You have to labor. You have to strain. It takes time. And usually they will tell you have to sort of push back all the distractions, push back all the noise, declutter your life, simplify the power of a simple life, and focus in. Do you see how all of the, and you could dress that up in a Hindu way, you could dress it up in a Buddhist way, you could dress it up in a self-help, modern, New Age way, you could dress it up in a Wiccan way, and there's ways that throughout church history, people have dressed this up in a Christian way. Everything always falls back on you to see God's true heart. And God says, I don't want you to see my front. I'm going to show you my true heart through my backside in a place that you're never going to perceive. This is why it can only be trusted. Luther links this directly to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and his cross and his resurrection. Because he said, what do we find there? We don't find God in naked majesty, in unvarnished power. We don't see his front side. What do we see? We don't see the wisdom of the world. We see, as the Apostle Paul says, the foolishness of the cross. We see God's backside. The only way that we could perceive that God is working when we see his backside, that is truly his heart that is displayed there, is that has to be trusted. A word has to come to you. The word of Jesus Christ, the word of his promise, the word of the gospel promise of his death and resurrection for you. It's too deeply hidden for you to find it. And so looking within, chasing God in nature, if that's how you want to define looking without, it's still incumbent upon you to clue your way to him. If you're going to try and find him in nature or the universe or whatever, it's always still going to fall back on you being able to follow the breadcrumbs properly and to push back all the distractions. No. This is why looking within, reflective faith is always going to be the problem. The cross is God's backside. Not only is God veiling this from Moses for his protection, God is telling Moses, where I truly want to be found is where people will never, ever look for God. I mean, it's not logical to look at a crucified criminal peasant who's asphyxiating on the cross, crying out in abandonment and say, aha, I followed all the clues and this must be it. Everything in nature, everything in my meditations and in my spiritual discernment finally took me to Good Friday. As a matter of fact, just look at the narrative of the text of the crucifixion. No one was standing at the foot of the cross, interestingly enough, except this Roman soldier. We might have to come back to that. But not his disciples, not the larger crowd of followers that were around Jesus. There were a couple of his female followers. No one thought, aha, the hinge, the divine hinge on which the entire cosmos turns, here at this crucifixion of a Jewish peasant dying as a criminal on a cross. Aha, I found it. There was no one like that. This is God's backside. This is where no one's going to look to find God's heart. And that God says, way back in Exodus 33, he said it to Moses. He would love to say it to us, Beatles, Theology, George Harrison types. I don't want you to look for me where on my front side. I don't want you to look where you feel you could see my face. I want you to look for me where I want to be found. My back is where I want to be found, which is foolishness to the world. It's a stumbling block, as the Apostle Paul says, it's a stumbling block to the Hebrews, to the Jews, and it's foolishness to the Greeks and the Gentiles. It can only be apprehended by faith. And this is why John's gospel is a beautiful culmination of this. In chapter 1, which is this magnificent chapter, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing has come into being. In him was life, and that life was the light. In him was life, and that life was the light of every person. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And then John says at the very end of verse 18, he says, no one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. No one has ever seen God. I thought Moses saw God. Moses saw a glimpse of where God is eventually going to be revealed in totality, but it's his backside. It's not where you would think to find him. And so Beatles theology maybe gives us a correct diagnosis of the feeling that we all have. But usually Beatles theology doesn't give us a word of promise that comes to us from the outside that says, this Jesus Christ, who was crucified, and God raised him from the dead, he is for you. And the promise is for you and for your children. Therefore, seek God where he wants to be found. Run to the foot of the cross. As John Donne says, there cling Hang upon him who hangs upon the cross. There is the answer to the quest. There is the answer to the longing. There is the answer to the desire. I want to see you. I want to see you. And on the cross, God says, through his cross and resurrection, and now available in the word of his promise, God says, here I am. I'm hearable. I'm communicated through your ears. I'm graspable now by your heart. To be sure, it's my backside. But nonetheless, here I am for you. This is my true heart. I don't want you to be running around in the mountains, and I don't want you to be saying, I want to see you, but I want to see you in your totality. I want to see your glory. And God says, no, to quote Luther, I'm not creating theologians of glory. I want theologians that are born of the cross. And that's where we find him. And you know what else? You could even say this. And that's where we find ourselves. That's where we find our true identity. It's not eat, pray, love, and take trips and look for God in all these different experiences. Where does he want to be found? He wants to be found in his son. This is why God said at Jesus' baptism, this is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. In him I am well pleased. And then at the transfiguration, God says, listen to him, run to him, cling to him. But it's his backside. And for the time being, till we die, that's where God wants to be found. Not in yourself, but in the word concerning his son. God bless you.